Grace and peace be multiplied unto you. I welcome you to today's lesson in science on the topic vegetable crop production. So this is a continuation video on what we've been talking about in the previous lessons. Objectives for today, we are going to look at, by the end of the lesson, you should know the advantages and disadvantages of vegetative propagation. You should also know the differences between sexual and asexual propagation and know the different types of cultural activities. So let's look at advantages of vegetative propagation. So for vegetative propagation, we saw that vegetative propagation usually relies on the use of part of the plants to make new ones. So one advantage is that growth in young plants is fast. There is no resting period compared to the seed propagation. Also, only one parent plant is needed for propagation. Another advantage is that the young plant matures rapidly, so they grow very fast compared to the seedlings. Also, young plants is less likely to be affected by adverse weather conditions. Because they grow very rapidly, it's very difficult for them to be affected by bad weather conditions. And lastly, the method used to propagate these plants is used to propagate plants which do not bear seed. So these are methods of propagation for plants which do not bear seeds. For example, pineapple. So you realize that these are the following advantages of vegetative propagation. So let's look at the disadvantages of vegetative propagation. No new varieties of plants are produced because propagation involves a single parent plant. So because a single parent plant is used, it's less likely that you get an end product which is not what you started with. Because when you use plant A to when you use plant A to propagate, it's likely that you are going to get plant a new one of plant A, and you can't get any variety. Both young and parent plants compete for light and nutrients. So usually plants that are propagated, they grow beside each other, and so because they grow beside each other, it's likely that they will be competing for light, nutrients, water, and space. Young plants are not able to colonize new areas since they grow close to the parent plant. Okay, that point was made early. So vegetative propagated plants are usually grow close to each other. The lack of variety leads to resistance to disease. So because they lack variety, for example, if there is a disease that attacks parent plant A, and then you grow a new plant, a young one A of a similar kind, if the disease can catch A, it's likely to catch the new one too. So lack of variety leads to resistance to diseases. Let's look at the differences between sexual and asexual propagation. So sexual propagation is usually propagation by seeds, and it usually requires two parents. So you realize that in pollination, what happens is that there is transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. So with cross pollination, it involves two parent plants. Okay, but for asexual propagation, it strictly requires one. Only one parent plant is needed to propagate the plant. Also, offsprings are not identical. So for sexual propagation, you realize that you can have you can have a flower of which is red, but after seed propagation it's likely to be yellow in color. So it's not guaranteed that you are going to have the same type of plant. But for asexual propagation, we are just going to have exactly the same type of plants. Sexual propagation, new varieties are produced. So just like I said earlier on, offsprings are not identical, so new varieties will be produced. But asexual, no new varieties are produced. And then sexual propagation has to do with embryo formation. Since it has to do with fertilization, therefore embryo would need to be formed. But asexual propagation does not have to do with fertilization. No fertilization. Okay. So the point is stated here. Asexual propagation involves pollination and fertilization. Asexual does not involve pollination and fertilization. Because usually you have to cut part of the plant to propagate it. Okay. Let's look at cultural practices. So cultural practices refers to all the activities that are performed or carried out on the farm or field after planting or transplanting of seedlings until they are harvested. So cultural practices basically are the things you do either on the field, on the plants, or the seedling or the vegetative propagated plant, whichever one. So the things or the practices you do to them or what you do to them until they are harvested is what we refer to as cultural practices. Let's look at the following the activities of cultural practices. We have watering, application of plant part food or fertilizer or manure, soil stirring, weeding, earthening up, mulching, staking, pruning, pest control, disease control, and drainage. So let's see whether we can run through quickly and see whether we can finish. So watering and irrigation. Watering and irrigation, this refers to the way by which water is supplied to plants so that they can grow to maturity, especially during periods of low rainfall. There are several ways of watering plants, and these include the use of watering can, the use of rubber hose or plastic pipes, or even trinklets. This is what we call trinklets. So the mechanized way is usually this type. This type is for the mechanized, and this one is for probably the old-fashioned way. So watering of plants is basically to supply water for the plants for their survival. Application of plant parts of food or fertilizer. So soils which are being used for cultivating crops gradually lose the nutrients in them. The nutrients lost have to be replaced through application of chemical fertilizer or organic manure, depending on the type of crops being cultivated. Also, as crops grow, the nutrients in the soil may not be enough to support. So you can see the two pictures over there. There's a man applying fertilizer, and this one right here is manure. So the manure is supposed to supply nutrients to the soil for the soil to grow. Stirring of the soil. This is the practice of ensuring that enough supply of air and water enters the soil. This is done by digging up the soil using a hand fork or a foot fork or even cutlass. So we usually stir the soil to ensure free movement of air in the soil, to increase activities of soil organisms like earthworm, and this helps soil to retain water for plant use, to loosen up the soil for roots to develop well, and to help control weed growth. Okay, so these are all the reasons why the soil is stirred. Let's look at weeding. Weeding is the act or process of removing weeds from the farm. So simply that. Removing the weeds from the farm is what we call weeding. And weeds also the reason is that when weeds grow together with the plants you are growing, they fight with the plant for air, water, space, and sunlight. And then the more the weeds grow, the more likely it is that your plants will die. So let's look at earthening up. Earthening up is a process of heaping topsoil around the base of the stem of a plant. This is to cover any exposed roots and tubers. So you realize that in the pictures here, there's heaping up happening here, and the same thing is also happens here. So this is a bad way, and this is a good way. Okay, so the importance is that it helps increase crop yield, especially root tubers like cassava. You don't want the roots to show, you want them to be properly covered up. Okay, it prevents crop pests like rodents from attacking the tubers. It also provides additional support to the crop, especially during strong wind. Let's look at mulching. So mulching simply is the practice of covering the surface of the soil with organic materials like straw, dead grass, dried leaves. So in the picture here, you can see that dried leaves and grasses are used to cover the soil. The same thing here, and this is what we call mulching. Now, importance of mulching is it helps conserve the water in the soil. It checks weed growth. It makes sure that weeds do not grow, and it checks soil erosion. It adds nutrients to the soil, humus to the soil, and it keeps the soil cool. Staking. Staking is supporting a crop with weak stem with a pole or stick so that it grows upright. So you realize that this man here has a stick, and then there's the plant itself is here. So staking is to ensure that if you have a weak stem, the weak stem does not grow slanted, but then it grows straight together with the stick. Okay, and that is what we call staking. So staking promotes air circulation in the farm. There's easy penetration of sunlight. It prevents the fruit from being attacked by disease, and it helps plants produce clean fruits. Let's look at the next practice called pruning. Pruning is the removal of excess branches and flower buds and also other parts of plants that are affected by diseases. So when you have a plant and you realize that some parts is affected by a disease, you prune it. Pruning simply means removal. So you remove it for the good ones to grow. So pruning usually prevents the spread of disease, it promotes air circulation in the farm, and it encourages penetration of sunlight. Pest control. So sometimes pests and rodents invade the farm, and it's important that you control them. Now in controlling them, certain chemicals are used. Okay. So pests is basically any animal that causes damage to crops. And examples could be rats, grass cutter, grasshopper, etc. And the reason why we control pests is so that they cannot transmit diseases, and they reduce yield of crops since most of them feed on fruits and seeds. Okay, let's look at disease control. Now sometimes when you grow a crop you realize that part of the leaves or the fruits become bad, and this is usually due to certain diseases that attack the plants. Okay, so some of the diseases are caused by factors like nutrient deficiencies in the soil, high or low temperature, excessive light or lack of it, high moisture, water content in the soil, high humidity, etc. So the reasons why you need to control disease is to increase crop yield, okay, and to increase the quality of crop produced, because these plants are grown on large scales, and then people wouldn't usually accept foods that have disease on them, fruits with disease or not quality fruits. Let's look at the last one, drainage. So this is the process whereby excess water in the soil is drained or removed through channels and pipes. This practice is done for crops like cocoa, tomato, maize that cannot tolerate too much water in the soil. Importance of drainage. It removes excess water from the soil so that they do not become waterlogged. It checks soil erosion. It helps regulate soil temperature. So sometimes there are certain crops that do not like a lot of water, and so when you supply them with the water, you need to find a drainage system for the excess water to flow out of the system. Otherwise, the soil is going to get waterlogged, and the water is going to stay there and cause problems. So basically, these are all the cultural practices that are employed or used during vegetable crop production. I hope you were able to understand this lesson. And just a quick summary, we saw the advantages and disadvantages of vegetative propagation. We saw the differences between asexual propagation and sexual propagation. We looked at cultural practices and some of what they were and their and reasons for the cultural practices. So I hope you grasp whatever I said, and then if you do not understand anything, I would advise that you watch the video about 2 or 3 times to understand them. So until we meet again, stay safe and enjoy your day. Bye bye.